Welcome to This Organized Life. If you're a mom, wife, or coffee lover seeking advice on how to reduce clutter and reclaim time, look no further than your host, Lori Palau, founder of Simply Be Organized and author of Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. For a lot of people, clutter is their dirty little secret, but it doesn't have to be. Each week, we will share practical tips, chat with experts, and provide strategies on how to keep you organized. I hope that by sharing our stories, you feel a little less alone and more empowered to tackle the areas that are holding you back. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of This Organized Life podcast. I am your host, Lori Palau. And if you were with us last week, you know that we have kicked off a new series, and it's all about the Enneagram and clutter, looking at the 5 clutter pitfalls. And so if you remember what they are procrastination, indecision, guilt, overwhelm, and time. And so each week we're walking through one of the clutter pitfalls, bringing on an expert who has well-versed in the Enneagram and that can speak to how the different types might show up with that specific pitfall. So hopefully you're with me. So last week we covered procrastination. If you haven't listened to it, when you're done listening to this, go back. I encourage you to go listen to it. But today we're talking all about indecision. And what does that really mean? It means that I don't know what to do. It's that I get something in the mail and do I need to keep it? Should I shred it? Should I get rid of it? Do I need to file it? What do I need to do? So I'm just going to put it over here. Or somebody gave this to me and I don't know. What am I supposed to do with this? Should I hold on to it? Can I get rid of it? What's my obligation? So that indecisiveness that we struggle with, that's going on in our mind, holds us back. It's a roadblock in us to living those simple, organized life. It adds to the clutter, whether it's emotional clutter or the physical clutter. And so it's a really, really powerful thing that we don't often talk about, but I have a great guest that is going to be joining me today and to unpack all of it. So coming out in a minute is Evan Doyle, and Evan is an Enneagram expert. He actually, he is the founder of the website called Enneagram Gifts. He's also has a YouTube channel called Enneagram with Evan and Evan Doyle Thinks. And he works for Cloverleaf, which, as many of you know, is a certification with a lot of different personality assessments, including the Enneagram. So he knows all about it. And personally, he's an Enneagram 5, which I find super fascinating because I love to pick the brains of 5s because they are the observer or the investigator, and they're in that, thinking head triad. So indecision, I think, very curious to hear from Evan how that plays a role in his own life. He's also a dad and a husband, and I am really, really excited to have him come and chat with me about this. So without further ado, please let me welcome Evan Doyle to the show.
Hi, Lori. Thank you so much, and happy to be here with you today. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes, me too. And getting 5s to even, I've done several series on the Enneagram, and there's certain types that whenever I put it out there of hey, I'm looking for an Enneagram, whatever for this, I get lots of, 7s and 8s that are sure, sign me up. And 5s and even 6s are oftentimes like crickets. And so I was yes, I love talking to 5s.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
that's cool. So I just gave our listeners a very top line overview, but just in your own words, tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. Currently I spend my time creating content around subjects that involve people development, personal growth, leadership. Some people might not know I was a pastor for 18 years. I started blogging in 2013 around a lot of these topics too, and have kind of just over time, just more and more just become interested in these things. So I've been married for 21 years to my wife, Tiffany. We have 3 sons together. And like you mentioned, I also work at this phenomenal company called Cloverleaf, where we use behavioral and strength-based assessments to provide coaching to strengthen things like leadership, collaboration, and teamwork in the workplace.
Yeah, I love it. So tell us, just before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, I'm always curious to hear people's kind of Enneagram, their own personal Enneagram journey. How are you first introduced to it? Um, how did you, get involved and really make this something that you were like, oh, this is something that I'm going to use and apply in my own life?
Yeah, so I am a podcast junkie podcast. So 2017, 2018, I started hearing the Enneagram pop up, not just on like one podcast, but across multiple podcasts that I listened to. And so I'm like, what is this? And I'm also like highly fascinated by assessments. So, I started taking the assessments and was at first a little like, I don't know if I'm a 1, if I'm a 3, I'm a 5. I wasn't sure of my type. But I started listening to typology podcasts, and at the time, they were doing a lot of panel discussions with people that were the same type,
Mhm.
having conversation and asking what it was like to be that type. And when they had a type 5 panel discussion, it was like I had never heard someone so accurately describe what it was like to be me. I didn't think anyone understood what it was like to be me, but they were like hitting the nail on the head. I was actually jumping rope at the gym that I work out in. And literally, as I'm jumping rope, listening to this podcast, tears started streaming down my face because I felt just so seen and understood. So that kind of like tipped me off into the Enneagram from there. Because of my blogging and content marketing background, I'm like, man, what kind of spaces there online for Enneagram content? At the time, 2018, 2019, it was far less saturated. There were some creators that were putting content out about the Enneagram, really good, authoritative, expert type content, but there was still room. And that's when I started Enneagram Gift and started a blog that now has over 100 articles on it about the Enneagram, and really allowed me to just explore this tool in depth over time.
Yeah, I love it. And again, I absolutely, before I met Evan, when I was doing all my Enneagram research, I would Google stuff and I would constantly be driven right to your website. And you've got some really, really fabulous content on there. And so I encourage people, if they're interested in learning about the Enneagram, and just kind of reading articles and looking at it, when obviously we link to everything. So we'll have links to your website there. So I know we're going to walk through the different types. We're going to talk about indecision, but I would love for you to just give a little summary for people that aren't familiar with the type 5. Just tell us a little bit about like the characteristics and kind of overarching theme of the 5.
Yeah. So for me, I recognize that I'm constantly pursuing understanding, which means I'm often analyzing, sometimes overanalyzing, interpreting, and observing almost every aspect and interaction in my life. I don't much enjoy like small talk, like, hey, how's the weather, how's sports, those kinds of things. I prefer like moving on to discussing ideas that feel like a bit weightier than just some of the topical things that we often discuss, which, I have to be aware of when and with who that's appropriate to do so with. But and I do enjoy sharing information that I've gathered, thus like the blogs and the YouTube channels. And it's important to me to be helpful to others, and, not just to myself. I want to try to give of the information that I'm collecting. I also think of like in terms of time, I think of time in relation to freedom. One of the biggest reasons that even recently that I've made big career changes is that I wanted freedom to prioritize and spend my time and energy around the things that I believed to be the most important. And so prioritizing my time and energy around those kinds of things is very meaningful to me. And I'm also anticipating, how much time and energy can I give to these things. So I don't know, that's kind of like
I love it. And my wheels are turning. I think it's great. And because again, I could go down a whole rabbit hole, and we're not going to do the whole episode about fives, but I'm like, of course you don't want to deal with the small talk, because you're trying to preserve time. You're probably trying to maximize. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm thinking, or I'm questioning whether or not that has to do with the fact of that you want to maximize the time you have, and small talk might be just added fluff that you don't need. And so like, let's make the most of the time we have together.
It does feel very like fluffy, but I also, I want to understand and know someone, and I don't really understand and know someone just by like, yeah, the weather feels good today. Like if I'm going to engage, I want it to be, not that that's not meaningful, but to me, I want it to be just a bit more meaningful than that. So
got it. So the topic today that we're here to talk about is really about indecision, because that's a big through line when it comes to people finding that freedom from clutter and disorganization, whether it's that physical clutter, whether it's the emotional, like, should I, shouldn't I, or just, and again, that can relate to the physical stuff, or time, like how we're spending it, our calendar, our obligations, all of that things. And so I think you're the perfect person to come on and talk about this, just because you are so, or your type specifically is so analytical and really like to gather information and knowledge. And I'm wondering if you can just walk us through, and I know that you had a little kind of rubric that you developed to kind of walk us through some examples of how the different types might struggle with indecision. So whether you know your Enneagram type or not, this is going to be really helpful, because this might give you an indication of not just yourself, but maybe these are people that you do life with, of seeing, oh, I'm noticing some patterns of behavior. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's I've got a lot of notes here, and so feel free to stop me at any time or whatever the case may be. But starting with type ones, they're the improver. And I think just right off the bat, recognizing that perfection isn't the only metric of value when it comes to making decisions can help them be a bit more compassionate when it comes to how they view the decisions that they're making. For each type, I kind of divided it into 4 aspects, like what could cause that type to become indecisive, what may be influencing that indecisiveness, how they might become aware when they're being indecisive, and a step that they could take to overcome indecisiveness. So related to type ones, and when we're talking about a cause of indecisiveness, I think it could be one thing that they may be prone to is because they have such high standards and set high standards for themselves and for just others around them, the pressure to uphold these standards in every decision, I could see and understand how that could lead them to become hesitant in certain decisions because they have to uphold what it is that they believe is so important. And, concerning what may be influencing that or driving that is that if a choice doesn't immediately or stand out to them immediately with how it aligns with their principles, if they can't connect what they believe, their values, to the decision immediately, I could see how that could delay their decision making as well. So they might work to become more aware when they are allowing perfectionism to drive too hard in what it is they're trying to decide to do. Meaning perfectionism isn't a reality for anyone. It's just not possible. So I think if they can sometimes take a step back, recognize that seeking perfection in every decision isn't feasible or possible or even beneficial. Sometimes a good decision is good enough. And sometimes starting with just the MVP or the prototype or whatever it may be is the good place to start, and you can improve from there. And a step that they might take is literally, and this may sound so corny, but like writing a pros and cons list, like writing down the advantages and disadvantages of each option, I think could help them clarify their thoughts related to things that they may be struggling to make a decision about.
Love that. I think that's such a like really practical thing, not just for ones, but really for a lot of the different types, but specifically because ones are a lot of times very black and white thinkers. And I think having that in front of them, and it gets it kind of out of their, even though they're not like in the head triad, but like gets it out of their head and onto paper and go, okay, one of these decisions has to be better. And I love everything you said. I think that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really actionable advice. Okay, let's move on to the twos.
Okay, yeah, two's the helper. For them, I think it's important to understand how a lot of their motivations is related to how deeply they care about relationships and how those impact them. So, something that could cause them to become indecisive is focusing on the needs of others so heavily that they become unaware of recognizing and acknowledging their own desire or preferences, which can lead them to feel uncertain about what they want. Like, what do I want and what they might want to do? So I think just being aware of that at times when they lean too heavily in what others may think or how others may be feeling, they can become neglecting of their self and push off the decisions that will help propel their life forward. Again, I think related to this, the thing that could be influencing or driving this is just their emotional state. How their gate is, this relationship good or bad? Is me and this other person, are we on good terms or are we on bad terms? So whether they are feeling loved or valued or feeling rejected, based upon how they're feeling, I think that can sometimes influence indecisiveness in their life. And I think they can just acknowledge their needs, which isn't easy. I can say that, but it's not always easy. But if someone can come alongside them and validate that it's okay to have needs, let me just do that for you. Even right now, if you're a type 2, it's okay for you to have needs. It's okay for you to have desires. And it is actually essential for you to address them and to move on those, to make decisions that are in your best interest at times.
Yeah. And I could see how that could be really almost like counterintuitive for a 2, because they're so just ingrained to be putting other people's needs first. I'm also curious, and I don't mean to jump around, but would you apply that? I could see a lot of that same logic being applied to the 9s as well. Kind of like that. I don't know what I like. I don't know what I need. I'm just, because I'm so used to, making sure everyone else is okay, that
Exactly.
I'm not. So, I just would, as you were talking, I just was thinking 9s as well could probably benefit from some of that advice.
Absolutely. And I think, like, without stereotyping, 9s could be one of the types that has the most difficulty with being indecisive. They're also known as the peacemaker. And so, they may push off what they want in a similar way that a 2 might, in order to just kind of go with the flow and give others what they want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's talk about the 3s. I'm married to a 3.
So you are? Oh, cool. I'm married to a 2.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say one last thing for a 2 is, like, if they can learn to set healthy boundaries that might be an action step that, they could even just write down, what are 3 boundaries that I could establish right now that would help me make a decision in an area of my life that I care about right now.
You know what? And I like that because, again, kind of like with the ones when you're writing it down, because 2s are very feeling dominant. A lot of times, if they're making decisions based only on that feeling center, having those boundaries written down that they could reflect on as, am I violating my own boundaries? And having that there, because when you're in it, and you're struggling with that indecision of, I agreed. And like, just to put it in practical terms of like clutter, like I'm not going to keep every piece of artwork my kid brings home from preschool, because I don't need all of it. I'm setting some boundaries of, and I did this like with my own kids, and I'm not a 2, but it was like, okay, if it's a handprint, or, something that's like specific to them, if it's a personal diagram, like a self-portrait, I'll keep that. But if it's just like we're, putting shapes on a page and gluing it, I don't need to keep that. So, and I know I'm probably getting haters out there, but again, it's thinking about realistically, what is this? I'm not a bad mom if I get rid of things. I'm deciding what has value. And a lot of times when you're like, oh, but my kid made this, I have to keep it. And that's like your natural, your gut reaction, or, what you're feeling, that isn't always necessarily the best course of action. So if you wrote down, I said, I'm only going to keep things that fall into this category. Does this fall into this category? It doesn't. Okay. And so it kind of takes that responsibility off of you and says, well, here's what we agreed upon.
That's so good. That's very insightful and so good.
So anyway, okay, well, let's move on. Let's talk about the 3s.
Okay, 3s, the achiever. And, I think 3s, they like to keep decisions moving. But one thing that might cause them to be indecisive, I could see them overanalyzing as well, because they're so success driven. They potentially could fall into overanalyzing as they're assessing potential outcomes of the decisions, trying to ensure that it aligns with their goals. Like if it doesn't strictly adhere with these big, audacious, meaningful, important goals that they've established, they could become too analytical and obsessive of, is this, if I make this decision, is it really going to like detract me from my goals? Do I really need to be that harsh? Do I really need to be that strict? Or is there some room and flexibility in my life to make some decisions that may not directly adhere to my goal, but may just be meaningful and bring additional value to my life? Something that could drive that is how deeply they care about how others perceive them, their public perception, the potential for social fallout from a decision. What will others think? How will this impact me? What type of results may fall through if I make this type of decision, especially if it doesn't align with the image or brand that they've already built and established. I think a step that they could take related to this is celebrating small wins, recognizing, looking for, pinpointing, not just the big goals that they've accomplished, but how can they take a step back and celebrate some of those smaller wins, recognizing that those are still achievements, and which can help them build momentum as they continue to make decisions. Because if they can understand that, I've got this win here, and that I can see how that builds on this and that builds on that, it can instill confidence within them to keep making decisions around the things that are important to them.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and again, a couple of things that come to mind, and for anybody that knows, I like to analyze Josh. He's been on the show before and we've talked about it, but I always say the devil's in the details, and a lot of the threes, and again, I'm stereotyping here, but especially we'll speak on Josh, like he's so big picture that he just will just gloss right over the details. And so again, the indecision, it's almost like it's just a tornado that comes through and he's like moving so far ahead. I don't know if it's the future orientation or if it's just the big picture, the achievement, where I do think the perception piece of it is like, how is this going to impact my brand or what people are going to think? I think that is a really key point that you made that I think definitely will resonate. But I just find it interesting because I think a lot of the things that where you've got a 1 that might sit there and be indecisive because they're overanalyzing. I feel like a 3 is not going to do that. They're just going to be, again, going to the complete other extreme. And so I love what you said about taking a pause to celebrate those little wins along the way. They're getting you to that big picture. So I think that's really good.
Yes. You want to move on to 4s?
Yeah. Let's do 4s and then we'll take a break after that. So let's do our 4s.
Yeah. So 4s, their nickname is the individualist. People use different names, but I like the individualist.
Me too.
And I think one thing that could cause indecision is, a fear of conformity. Because in many ways they have this innate aversion to anything that could be mainstream or like just generic, standard, typical. I could see how it could cause them to hesitate from making decisions in concern or fear that it could be just ordinary or bland. And so if I'm going to fall into that category, I'm going to postpone this decision. I think what could be driving that is how fully they feel and have permission to be creative in exercising that decision, or the potential that they have for choice to express creativity and to explore discovery in the decisions, in the actions that follow that decision. Will they still have freedom and ability to have creativity and expression as a result of that decision? So I think one thing that they could keep in mind is that not all decisions have long-lasting impacts on their identity and on their value. And if they make a wrong decision, it's just temporary. Just realize that there are some things that are temporary. And if you can shift your perspective on that, related to some of these decisions, you could just view it more as a bump than a mountain. You make the decision and you move on. And one way, a step that you might take is journaling. Again, like coming back to the pen and paper or whatever, typing keyboard, but writing out your thoughts can assist in clarity and in determining like how valuable is this decision to me, like, and how much creativity am I going to have as a result of this decision? Like, how much can my creativity continue to influence the actions that follow this decision? Just clearly, like, thinking that out, writing that out, I think can be extremely clarifying for them.
Yeah. Do you have any 4s in your family?
None in my family. I have a really close friend who's a 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
My daughter's so my younger daughter's a 4. And so I've spent many years not knowing the Enneagram, dealing with organization and clutter by proxy through the lens of a 4. And it was really, really eye-opening. And I saw indecision being a really big through line for her for a lot of different reasons. And one of the things, and I was just kind of jotting down notes with what you were saying, is a lot of the 4s, again, I think that that wanting to not be boring and not to, just the act of organizing, if it's not done, it can seem very mundane, and fours would rather be doing something that's more enriching. So I could see that. Another reason why I think indecision can be a real roadblock for fours is their orientation of time being the past. So again, for people that are familiar with kind of the past, present, future, our fours are, their orientation to time is going down memory lane. I've seen them really struggle. So giving that space to have that time to go through that, because that indecision of, I don't really know, I wore this concert t-shirt, it doesn't fit me anymore. Am I going to keep it? Why do I need to keep it? Should it be in a memory? Should I donate it? What am I going to do with it? And that'll go down like a whole rabbit hole of things. So I think that's a really like a specific application of how it can show up for them. And again, I love what you said about not looking at everything like it's a mountain, because I see it now. Like if something goes sideways for my daughter, that's a 4, everything seems to be catastrophic. And my new phrase, which not like it's anything, quotable, but I'm just like, this is an inconvenience. It's not a catastrophe. But with her, so many things are a catastrophe. And so I think just that pressure that they are unconsciously putting on themselves of making those decisions is just exhausting. So they would rather just like procrastinate, not do it, put it aside, because they know that they're putting this unnecessary weight of, this is like a make or break decision, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And the whole sentimental looking in the past, that like being aware of that, if you are wondering if you're a type 4, that is a really good insight. Like I'm a 5, but I can lean pretty heavily into my 4 wing and become very sentimental about holding on to, and that falls into my collecting and that kind of stuff. But like I can become very sentimental about things that maybe could just declutter my life.
Well, you're also, orientation to time is also the past. So that could have something to do with it. We're going to take a break right here, and then we're going to come back and we'll pick up where we left off. So sit tight. All right, Evan. So I know we spoke about 5s a little bit because that's your type, but I'm wondering if you want to just kind of apply your strategies for the 5s. And I think you'll obviously be coming from personal perspective, which I think will be great.
Yeah. So I'll try to do this quickly too, but I think due to their like insatiable, like hunger and thirst for knowledge, 5s can overanalyze situations, conversations, decisions, and that ultimately will lead to paralysis and even making any type of decision. I remember when my wife and I were first married, I needed to buy a pair of dress shoes, like a nicer pair of dress shoes. And this was back when you would go to the mall, and malls were actually had stores in them and all kinds of things. I walked into the first store. I found a pair of shoes that I liked. I'm like, I like those. She's like, well, why don't you get them? Like, there's no way I can get them. I have to know what my options are. And I swear to you, we went into every shoe store so that I could understand what shoes were available to me, and we went back to the first store and I bought those shoes.
As an eight, that would make me crazy, but I'm laughing because that is so on brand for a 5. Like that is so on brand.
Exactly. So like understanding, like sometimes, knowledge is great. Knowledge is power, all those things, but you can only collect so much knowledge, and you need to be aware when you have enough knowledge to move on and to make a decision. And if I like the shoes, that's probably enough knowledge when it comes to me buying a pair of shoes. And understanding too, like that you can't know everything. And most of the time decisions have to be made with incomplete information. And so take a step back, recognize you probably already have more than enough information to make a decision, pull the trigger, make the decision, and trust your competence.
Oh, I love that. Yes. That's so, so valuable right there.
You've gained information, you've researched, you've studied, you've got notes, you've done everything. Allow that to build your confidence in the knowledge that you've already accumulated, in your expertise, and realize that you're probably more prepared than you're giving yourself credit for.
That's so good. I love that. Love it. Let's talk about the sixes.
Yeah, sixes. So they want to seek assurance when they make decisions, and they want that assurance from other people. So they'll often look for external validation and, like I said, reassurance before they make a decision. And they would also fall into looking at time from the past. And so, one thing that could be influencing this.
No, sixes are present. Sixes are present, right? 1, 2, 6.
You're right. Yeah.
I was like, wait a second. Have I been teaching the wrong thing all this time?
No, I had them I was thinking 5, 6, and 7s as head type.
They're all head triad. Yes. They're all head. They're in the head space. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. No, you're right. So, but past instances where decisions led to unfavorable outcomes, that they may give that more credit than is necessary, and that could cause them to delay making decisions. And also examining their fears, distinguishing between, is this a genuine concern or just an irrational fear that's clouding my judgment? If they can distinguish between that, that could be very helpful. I think just a practical exercise for them to lean into and to even like study or look into is, how can they actively begin trusting their own intuition and judgment? Like, there's, man, one of my best friends is a 6. He is so smart. He's always prepared. He's always thought things through. He's just a great friend. He's a wise person. They have such a hard time trusting their own intuition and insight, but oftentimes they already have it. They have what they need. I think but that reassurance piece is so heavy for them. And that's why I say, if they can work on leaning into their own intuition and judgment, they're probably going to make the right decision 9 times out of 10.
Well, and I see it in the world of, decluttering and getting organized, where a lot of our clients are that will hire somebody to come in and help them. It's really just for that validation of that they're on the right track. So I'll have clients, when I used to go out and work with people a lot one-on-one, I would go in their homes and they were like, thank you for giving me permission. And I'm like, you already knew what you needed to do. You just wanted to hear it from somebody else that it was okay, because again, you weren't trusting yourself, and it's that trust factor. And so I think for a lot of people, having that accountability partner also is really helpful when it comes to that. If you're going to declutter and hold yourself, it's like, again, if you are struggling with that internal motivation to do it, or that trust of yourself, having somebody there to help encourage you along the way, whether it's a professional or a friend, a buddy, whatever, it really helps to move the needle, because once you start picking up that momentum, and then you'll start to build that confidence. But I think that, like you said, that 6s are like, I'm not really sure. I don't really trust myself. So I think I could be making a wrong decision. So find somebody that will reassure you. It's okay. If you can't trust yourself until you get confident enough that you're making these decisions, bring somebody along. It's okay. Because again, it is something that we're trying to develop these, I would say, building that muscle that you don't intuitively have.
And that's a really good call out. Like, they will want that reassurance, but will they always proactively seek that reassurance? Sometimes they have a hard time asking for help, and
Totally.
that be a really good action step. Like, who are the 2 people that you can proactively confess, admit, request, just occasional input and advice from to help you feel more reassured. That's really good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, let's talk about the sevens.
Yeah, sevens, visionaries. Sevens, super bright, fun, energetic type individuals, and they have a desire for pleasure and want to avoid pain. So when you think about them becoming indecisive, I think they make lots of decisions. They just may not always make the decision that will be the hard decision or the best decision or even the right decision, because they will avoid difficulty or painful situations. So they're going to become indecisive if they perceive a decision might lead them to potential discomfort.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I could see sevens also being indecisive of like, again, if thinking it's going to be pulling them away from something, or if I'm making a decision, like you said, that is going to be, well, then if I get rid of my kayak that I haven't used in 10 years, I might one day want to go kayaking and I don't have it, but you start to then factor in the like, okay, let's talk about the practicality of it. And it's bringing that like adulting into the conversation, I think, for a lot of times, because again, sevens want to surround themselves with all this fun stuff because it gives them opportunity. And
Yes.
we don't always have either the physical space or the space in our calendar to say yes to all of the things.
Exactly. So, being aware of when those things that are maybe more fleeting or just moving on from one thing to the next are diverting your attention to the decisions that actually need to be made. I think being aware of that is important, and, assessing like realistic outcomes, not just facing, and this might sound really doom and gloom, but just at least being open to embracing that not all options are going to yield immediate joy and satisfaction. And sometimes that still is the right decision to make. And one thing that they might, a step that they could take is again, is seeking counsel, consulting with a trusted friend or mentor who understands their nature and can provide some grounding and some just practical advice for them to make decisions that they may be avoiding.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. I think accountability, I think every type could pretty much benefit from some accountability, but I think for sevens, it is important to have that like come to Jesus moment. Like, come on, like, let's think about things from a practical standpoint, as opposed to just all of the other stuff that could possibilities.
Yes. Yeah. Concerning the type 8s, the challenger, I'd be curious to hear maybe I can just very quickly, I'll go
I
through
want you to go first, and then I'll definitely give you my opinion.
Okay. So I would say one thing that could cause indecisiveness for them is mistrust. If they have deep-seated issues with trust, I think that could make them indecisive, because they're wary of the motivations of others.
Mhm.
And one thing that could be influencing that is, 8s typically have a small circle of people that they really trust, and I mean tight. And if you break that trust, it's kind of like it can be severing sometimes. So they value loyalty, and they value the opinions of those that are close and trusted circles, and hold weight in those decisions. But that sometimes I think it's good for them to go outside of that and be a bit more objective. And I think, again, related to this trust is just like doing some introspective, growing a little bit in self-awareness around these issues, reflecting on whether their hesitancy is based on genuine mistrust, or is it coming from fear, things that may be more deep-seated, those types of things. And, again, coming back to the counsel, seeking objective advice, someone that's maybe not on one side or the other, but that can just be objective, take a look at the overall picture and not get wrapped up in an emotion, and just give an unbiased perspective. I think sometimes that can help clear the fog for eights in the decisions that they have to make.
Yeah. Okay. So you want me to weigh in? You ready?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and again, no two eights are alike. So I'm speaking for myself. When it comes to clutter, I don't tend to struggle with a lot with indecision. I have no problem making a decision. And if it's not the right decision for the most part, I know most things are not life or death. So I'm like, if this flops, we'll just do it a different way, or we'll figure it out, or whatever. So that is not something that I oftentimes struggle with. Where I do see indecision being a roadblock is more in business, like in a leadership role, because I do, whether it's with my company, leading my team, or I do like a lot of volunteer work, and I like run a couple of different like charity groups. And so I want to give pause. If I'm not 100% sure, I think that it may have a larger ripple effect on other people, and like, what is the greater thing? I might struggle with some indecision. And I love what you said about seeking that objective counsel, because I think one of the problems that eights encounter, again, speaking for myself, is oftentimes we're the leaders. Like, people are coming to us as the experts or the ones to get it done, and so it's important that we have other people that we can go to bounce ideas off of, or to vent to, or whatever it is, to get other feedback. And I know for me, that is where, if I'm like, I'm not sure what direction I should be doing something, having that person, whether it's my therapist, whether it's my operations manager, whether it's one of my girlfriends, because again, I think it is important, and we don't want to be seen as weak. So we're not going to necessarily put it out there to the world, because I think it's important for us to be seen and by people as an authority, knowing not that I know every single thing, but having, just like you said, that inner circle of people that you can go to for different things. So I think that having that for that indecision piece, but I would say for the actual physical stuff, most things I'm pretty good at, because I don't struggle a ton with emotional clutter. It's more that, am I overextending myself kind of thing?
Yes. Yeah. I can see that. And yeah, being growing in some awareness around when you're like allowing control. I think that could be another thing. I'm the only one that can do this right.
Absolutely.
And understanding when that is preventing you from making decisions around delegation, or empowering others, and then recognizing too, like when an inability to be vulnerable is preventing you from really connecting in a way where others are going to want you to lead them or guide them. I think those are key points that you pointed out that are important for eights, especially the eights. I know you're right. Like, if they got stuff cluttered in their house, it's not an issue for them to get rid of it and to get it gone, to clean it up, to completely rearrange their whatever they want to do. Like, it's just not an issue. But some of those other areas, I think, where relational dynamics and decisions around those types of things, I think that could be the bigger issue there.
But I will say, because we do have a lot of other like professional organizers that listen to our show as well. And I will tell you, learning not just about my own type, like, even though I don't personally struggle with indecision of like, just get rid of it, like the shoes, like using your shoe, like just buy the shoes and let's move on. Right. And if you don't like them, we'll get another pair of shoes, like whatever, not to be wasteful, but like but having the grace now, walking through like all the other types and seeing where somebody else and why somebody else might be struggling has been really transformational for me, when working with clients or working with other people in my family, you know, in just interpersonal dynamics of maybe you're someone listening and you're like, I don't really struggle with that. I can make a decision to move on. But you know that your kids are struggling and you're, instead of being your head against the wall going, just make the decision already, which is what I did when my kids were growing up. Now I have this other lens that I can say, oh, here's why you might be struggling. So let's put these other guardrails in.
That's so good. That's awesome.
All right, let's just wrap up. And I know we touch on it because I brought them into the picture when you were talking about twos, but let's just close this loop up with the nines.
Yeah, nine. So I would say, you know, like we mentioned regarding the twos, their tendency to merge with others and other people's desires can make it hard for them to recognize what they want and to even articulate their own needs. And so oftentimes, instead of making decisions, they'll just become stagnant and just let life kind of slip by. And you know, things can get messy, things can get cluttered. I would say in the physical environment, I would say internally, it's probably becoming messy, but in some ways they're numbed out to it and they don't realize that it's even happening. So they may wait for others to make the decision or for everyone to agree before they weigh in. And I think if they can begin to recognize this desire for peacemaking and understand their yearning for this peace, if they can just kind of waking up to that, I think their eyes can be open to how that sometimes can lead them to inaction. And I would encourage them to embrace their individuality, realizing that they're allowed to have desires, they're allowed to have preferences, and that it's okay to take action, to speak up, to make decisions, even if others don't necessarily want or agree with that. It's okay for them to voice and to make those decisions without guilt because their voice matters.
I'm just taking notes because my other daughter's a 9. So again, I've done a lot of personal studying on the 9s. I agree with what you're saying. And just a couple other things that I want to just add to that is I think that this notion, or not, it's not a notion, but that internal belief that my voice doesn't matter. I think that indecision, it can so easily just come there because you're like so used to just merging and going with the flow of like, I don't know, I don't care. And so that can result in clutter, right? It can result in whether it's stuff piling up or just relational clutter. Like, again, it doesn't have to be just physical clutter. It's all this unwanted and unnecessary stuff. And one of the biggest things that I've tried to focus in on with a lot of 9s, because they're so conflict avoidant, is understanding that communication and a conversation does not always equal conflict. Like you speaking up, and again, I have a daughter that's like just graduated college. So she's got roommates and it's, you're looking at interpersonal dynamics and, if your one roommate's leaving dishes in the sink and it's stressing you out, you can have a conversation about it without it being a conflict. It doesn't have to be a confrontation. It could just be a conversation. And that is something, because I think 9s are just associate, they're more concerned with that conflict avoidant, that they will sacrifice that inner peace of that they're looking for, because they think that they're not, it's an either or as opposed to the both and.
Yes. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Thank you for walking us through that. I love learning about it, especially through the lens of a 5, because we know that you did your research and it was overly analytical. No, in a good way, in a really good way. I love it because sometimes, again, in my 8ness, I can just kind of barrel through things. And I think this is really helpful for people to kind of really dissect each of the different types. Before we take our last break, tell our listeners if they want to learn more about you, where can they go? I know we mentioned your website before, but feel free to.
Yeah, sure. If they want to follow me on Instagram, it's at the Evan Doyle, and on YouTube, you can follow along at Evan Doyle Thinks. And if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, you can do so at curatinggood.com.
I know. I love that. I saw that. I was like, oh, that's so great. I love that. All right. We're going to take one last quick break, and we're going to come back and just wrap up with our Hot Mess Minute questions. So sit tight. All right, Evan, we're in the home stretch now. So are you a reader? Are you?
Yeah.
I know you're a podcast listener. So if you're not a big reader, and this could apply to audiobooks too. It doesn't have to be. We love all different types of inspiration from our guests. So curious if there's a book, and if it's not a book, you can put a podcast. We've had people substitute it. But a book that has been something that has been transformational in your life, or that you want to recommend, whether it's something that you go back to often, or maybe it's something that fun that you just read that you want to share with our listeners.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I would say Start With Why by Simon Sinek. That he's got very popular TED Talk, but the book dives into that. And for me, as a 5, I'm always wanting to understand why. And really that book kind of explores the power of digging in and starting with why, as opposed to the what's and how's. And then the other book I would suggest is Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. It really does a great job of helping an individual see themselves in the ways that they have been blinded to, their blind spots, the ways that they interact with people, maybe even setting double standards, and with practical insight and tools for how to get outside of the box and approach things a bit differently.
I probably need to read that book, and I feel like it's going to be a gut punch.
I think it is for everyone. But it's very good.
Yeah, it sounds like something, if you're in leadership, it's something that you should probably read. I'm going to see, and this is why I asked this question, because then I get to learn about all these great books. Okay. And then our last 2 questions that we ask every guest all the time, because we know that we can't always be organized, and we're not always a hot mess. It's a little bit of both. So in this particular season of your life, where do you feel the most organized, and where do you feel like a little bit of a hot mess?
Yeah. So most organized, I have a pretty structured regimen to working out. I know when it's happening, I know what I'm doing, and it provides a lot of structure and space for me to clear my head. So I would say consistently, that's where I feel the most organized. Concerning feeling a hot mess, I've got a lot of irons in the fire related to side projects, content development. Obviously, I have a full-time job as well. So in many ways, kind of even right now, I'm in this clarifying process of which projects do I most want to focus on. And so in some ways, I feel like that is the area where I am a bit of a hot mess.
Hey, I appreciate that, and I'm here for it. And I think anybody that's listening, especially our entrepreneurs that listen, can relate to that. And I think anybody can, but specifically, I know that doesn't always seem to be enough hours in the day to do the things that we want to do. But I am so appreciative that you carved out an hour of your day to sit with us and share your wisdom and insight on this really important topic. So thank you, Evan. And we'll make sure, again, we'll link to everything in our show notes. So make sure that you check that out to connect up with Evan. And if this is your first time tuning in, thanks for being here. This is going to be a great series. So make sure to click the subscribe button, follow, watch us on YouTube, whatever. And if you feel so inclined, share this with a friend and leave us a review. Only the 5-star ones, though. We don't like the other ones. So thank you so much. And I'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, I'm Lori Palau. Peace out. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, please spread the love and share it with your friends. And if this is your first time joining us, make sure to click the subscribe button wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, please leave us a review so other people know that our show is worth the listen. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram at This Organized Life Podcast. And if you'd like to connect with us, you can head on over to our website at simply the letter B like boy organized.com, which is filled with tons of resources, including free downloads, checklists, links to our amazing organizing partners, and all of our digital offerings. things. I'll see you next week for another episode of This Organized Life.